Riding mower deck repair. This is part 2. In this video, rusted deck restoration, easiest way, I'm going to show you how I take this rusted deck and restore it. I'm going to show you what I use, and at the end of the video I'll show you the final results. So let's get started. Okay, it's supposed to rain tonight and thunder showers tomorrow, so I'm going to clean this deck up tonight. It's been a few hours since I put another coat of that acid on. You can see how it's cleaning up. Over here is still that rust, and some places really well, but I have to tell you, it beats all that sanding. This is something else I've been working on. I've been holding off on it. This is a wood burning stove. It's been left outside. This is how I picked it up. I have a cover over it, but it's still rusted up. Here's the rust, and down here I coated it with that acid. It turned black and now it turned rusty. So I'm going to wash these down with the hose, get this acid off, and then dry it up really well. And this over here, I might just put a coat of motor oil on it just to keep this from rusting up again, because the cover I have is from the top and it ends about here. But look at this rust. This isn't as pitted as the deck was though. This is more of a surface rust. I was even thinking about just starting a hot fire in here with some pallet wood, because that burns very hot. And then once it gets really good and hot, then grind this down. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to handle this. It's been sitting here for a while, and it's another one of those to-do items on my list. Anyway, let me get the hose, wash these down, see what they look like. If it's better to wet it, then dry it, or leave it as is. This is the next day. They were predicting rain last night. I had this in the garage. Now, I was going to grind this down. This is where I wiped it. You can see the rust over here. Watch this. When I wipe it, it seems to be taking it off. I'm going to wipe this whole deck down, and then I'm going to coat it one more time with just a straight acid. Here's more of the heavy rust over here. Look at this. Looks like it's taking it right off. I might not even have to do it one more time, but in for a penny, in for a pound. Just give it one more shot, wipe it down really good. Over here I might just grind it a little bit because it's flaking. You can see how much of the metal the rust ate up. Over here is pretty thick. So like I said, I'm going to wipe this down, let it sit. Tomorrow I'll wipe it down again. I'm not sure if I'm going to rinse it with anything. If I should rinse it with water and dry it, or just wipe it down and put the primer on. See what it looks like tomorrow. I might grind it down. Might have, like I said, I might have, look at this. This is something else. Now, I've taken care of my deck before, but I never had this much rust on it. Normally it was just a little surface rust. I hit it with a wire brush, primed, painted, and it was good for another 2-3 years. This one was pretty pitted. I don't know how long it sat, but it's not doing a bad job over here. This is just a rag, nothing abrasive. If I had one of those scouring pads, like those, they used to call them curly K's, like the bronze or stainless steel, probably do a good job on this too. Anyway, I'm gonna put a pair of gloves on. Yesterday when I was picking this up to put it away, this metal touched my leg. Didn't burn at first. As I was sitting down, I felt a little burn on my leg, and there were little burn marks on my leg where this ridge just touched my leg. Oh, and I had a can of acetone sitting on the floor. Where this splashed, it made it didn't burn all the way through the can, but it made burn marks in the can of acetone. So the stuff is pretty strong. If you use it, be very careful. Take all the precautions. I have to go now. I have to get this done. On my way out this morning, I had a full trailer and my truck broke down. That'll be a video coming up. Not sure what it is, if it's a fuel pump, if it's electrical. That's something else I have to get into. Instead of my to-do list getting shorter, it just seems like it grows every day. Be back tomorrow to show you the results on this deck. Alright, I hosed it down, and I'm going to have to dry this up really well, otherwise it's just going to rust right up again. In some of the areas, not as good as I anticipated it would be. See how all in here? But look in the areas like this. This is pretty impressive right here. Look at this. I mean, this is right down to metal. Took the rust right off. Okay, over here was pretty heavy. up in this area I had it ground down a little bit better. So tomorrow I'm just going to take the wire wheel to this. If it's raining out, I'll make room in the garage to do it in the garage, but I prefer to do this on the outside. Only because of the dust and everything. Okay, that's not too bad. Now as far as the stove, this over here, I tell you, if I took a wire wheel to this right now, I'm pretty sure I'd get this rust right off. This is, now, here's a spot down here. Look how bad it was. You can see that. Okay, so now this is where I didn't have any of the acid. This is what it looked like down here. I think a couple of coats of this and rinsing it off, drying it up real quick, will get me to where I want to be. These lines that are in here, this is all etching that was already in the metal. Had nothing to do with the acid. There's etching over here also, and I didn't have any acid up on this end. As you can see the difference, no acid, acid. Something else, save a lot of grinding, a lot of dust. This is the first time I'm attempting to do it with acid. And the first time I worked on a deck, the first time I'm restoring a deck that was this pitted and this messed up. I mean, I've bolted decks back together before. And like I said, if you want to see an ugly weld, go check the video up above. But the weld is holding. I hit it with a hammer. It doesn't look like it's going anywhere. So I'm going to dry this up, flip it over, start cleaning up the other side. The other side isn't rusted like this, just a few spots here and there. Sand it down to bare metal where there's rust. And tomorrow, when this is good and dry, I'm going to hit it with the wire brush, dust it off. I'll wipe it down with a rag and alcohol to get the dust off it. I'll prime it, flip it over, prime the other side, let it dry for the day. The end of the night I'll prime it again, and the next day I'll paint it up. I have the yellow paint for this, but I might just use some of the different color paints I have on the bottom just for the underneath, and to save that yellow for the top, because I have another deck I have to take care of. Not quite as bad as this one, just a little rusted, and it needs a little sanding down, some paint, and some of the hardware has to be changed, but no welding on it. Anyway, that's it for today. After putting another coat of acid on this yesterday, I rinsed it off and I dried it, but you can see how it rusted up anyway. But this is just the surface rust. See, with just the rag it's coming off. I'm going to wipe this down with a rag. Then I'm going to hit it with the wire wheel, and then I'm going to put a coat of the primer on it. Now, I brought this in last night because they did say it was going to rain, and it did rain. This is the rainfall from last night. And I don't think I'll be able to get the second coat on it today with the humidity in the air. It looks like it's going to rain again. After I grind this down and paint it, I'm going to have to bring it inside. But that acid did take a lot of the rust off, and it saved me quite a bit. Rinsing it off with water isn't the way to go. I believe if you decide to rinse it off, if you use this, maybe a vinegar solution, I'm not sure, maybe just wiping it down and then wiping it with a damp rag and then drying it off might be a better alternative. And as soon as it dries up, prime it right away. But I'm going to get started on this now, and once I have it primed, I'll be back to show you the prime. I like to get 2 coats of prime on here and the coat of paint. As I mentioned earlier, I might not use the yellow. I have paint that's been sitting around for a while. This is the bottom part of the deck. Nobody really sees this. This is more for rust prevention and to maintain the integrity of the deck. Let me get started, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. I have the first coat of primer underneath the deck. Now I'm working on top. This is the first time I've used a wheel like this, and I have to say, for the flaking paint and some of the rust, this works very well on the flaking paint. It lasts a lot longer than the flap disc. And you can see over here where I was taking it off, where the metal is shiny, there wasn't any rust. This is where I've been grinding wherever there's a paint blister. There was a paint blister right over here, and as I ground down to it, you can see there was rust underneath. Took most of the rust off. Where it's shiny, there wasn't any rust, but the paint was flaking. So I'm going to continue with this wheel to knock off these loose particles. Then I'm going to come with this cup to clean it up. I might have to use some sandpaper by hand just to feather this in. I mean, we're not painting the car, not looking for a perfect finish, but we're doing a job. We'd like it to come out nice. The main thing is the preservation of this deck. You see over here, here's where the paint blister was. When I ground it down, this was all rusted, and if you look close, you can see it's pitted. So the rust was getting into the deck. And on decks that I've seen rotted, they usually rot right here in the middle. This is where the grass accumulates under the tractor. You really don't see it unless you get under there and clean it. This looks like the belt was just hindered and rusted out. You have a lot of flaking over here. I have to get this rust off and come back a little bit more. This is a little peeling over here. This was rusted up. I'm just pointing it out so if you decide to do this, you know what you're coming into. Now over here, this would be another rust spot and another place where the deck could rot through and break. The bracket was here to hold the guide for the belt, and you can see how much rust is in here. This is where the paint that just flaked right off. Okay, over here I'm going to come back a little bit more. Over here I can feel this is a little flaky here. I could get under that. This bracket, this was the cause of the original repair. This bracket broke off. After I welded this back on, I just put some paint on so it wouldn't rust. After I finished this, I went to the underside of the deck to grind it down and paint it. So now I'm definitely going to grind this back more. And I thought this was weak over here, but it was pretty solid. I was hitting it with a ball peen hammer and it didn't go through. Here's another bad spot under the flap here. This paint was just coming right off. You can see the blister. Let me see. Yeah, the camera's picking it up. You can see it blistering over here. All under this blister is rust. So I'm going to finish. I'm going to continue with this wheel. I'm going to go to this, get a little sandpaper, going to clean it up, put a coat of primer on it. Once it dries, where I can flip it over, I'm going to turn it over and put the second coat of primer on the bottom. Then I'll probably flip it over. By that time, I'll be able to put the second coat on here. It rained last night. Today it's not as humid as it was yesterday, but it does look like we might get something today. I'm going to get back to this deck. Once I have both sides done, I'll be back to show you what it looks like primed, and then I'll be back to show you once it's painted. So my next steps are to finish grinding this down, clean it up, prime it, paint it. Once that's all done, I'll be back to show you what it looks like. All right, I'm back and I'm wrapping up this paint job. This is the bottom side of the deck. The blades are off. And after I ground this down, most of it was down to bare metal. I used the acid, I used the 2 wire wheels. And what I used for paint, I used this old primer I had sitting around for I don't know how long, this Rust-Oleum. This was in my garage for over a year. And in my garage, it freezes in the winter time. In addition to that, the can was dented. Once I opened it, I couldn't close it again. I had to put it into a coffee can. And besides that, it got hard on the inside. It had what we call this protective layer. I'm sure that diminishes the quality of the paint. But this is the underside of the deck. I put it on with a brush. Because of the condition of the paint, I didn't try putting in the spray and spraying it. I brushed it on. You can see it's a little rough. Here's where the weld was. I didn't bother grinding that down to make it pretty. And I have 2 coats of primer on here. This is paint that's been laying around for I don't know how long. I can't remember when I had a white car, how many years back that was. There was about a half a can of this that I used. And there was very little of this Rust-Oleum over here. This paint, this 2-touch. So after 2 coats of primer, I added these 2 coats on. It's going to be a while before I put this deck on the tractor. While working on it, I found out the bearings and these spindles have to be changed, and the tractor itself needs work. So when I go out, I might buy another can of either black paint, green paint, some low-cost paint just to put on the bottom. This isn't to pretty it up. This is just to keep it from rusting while it's being used. On the other side, I did prime it. and I use the Rust-Oleum farm implement paint. I have one coat of this paint on. I'm going to flip it over now and put the other coat on, and I'll show you what that looks like. It always looks a little better, but I have a lot to do and I have to move on. So here we go. And here's the top side. Now you can see where I ground this down to bare metal, and I was going to feather it in with some paper and make it look nice. This, I knocked some of the paint off. I'm working on this wheel barrel over here. Should have been a little more careful, but the second coat will cover that up, and you can see the white primer underneath. So this whole deck was primed, even where the yellow paint was still in good shape. I just scruffed it up a little bit and I painted it with the primer, and this is the first coat. It's not the prettiest because you can see the lines. This is from a heavy paintbrush. I should have smoothed it out a little better, but again, this isn't going anywhere. It's not the fender of a car, it's just a deck, and this is more for protection than it is for looks. You can see in here, as a matter of fact, I missed that. That was from the primer. Those clumps that were in there, I thought I got them out. This is that ugly weld that's in that other video up above. This over here was just me playing around with the weld, and I'm going to give it a second coat now, but all in all, doesn't look bad. And the decals that were on here, I taped, so when I pull this tape off, the decals will still be there. Doesn't matter, I just figured they're there. And again, here's where I hit it on the wheel barrel, and you can see this was a little weak over here, but it didn't go through the primer. I have to be a little more careful when I flip these over. Let me give it a second coat and I'll show you it all shiny, and that'll be it. Well, the painting part is done. I have the second coat of paint on here, and that's all I'm doing. And I used about 3/4 of a can of paint, half a can of paint. This is a 42-inch deck. I used about a half a can to 3/4 of a can of paint. If your deck is bigger and you're painting the underside, remember there's always that little bit of paint in the can that you can't get out. If you want it nice and clear, again, this was done with a brush for the primer, and I didn't sand it down. If I was worried about it looking nice and smooth, you just sand down in between layers with a fine sandpaper. This is for those of you who haven't painted before, maybe doing this for the first time. Those of you who paint know what was and what wasn't done over here. This is what it looks like. It's not bad. Again, nowhere near perfect, but I wasn't going for perfection. I was just going for deck preservation. Again, it's rough back here, and this is all from the paintbrush. And that primer paint had those clumps in it. I showed you in the can the clumps that were in there. I could have strained it, could have did a lot more with it, but again, in a couple of years, if this isn't cleaned up, this is all going to have to be sanded down and painted again. And if I'm not sure if I'm keeping this or not. Depends how I get that tractor running. But this is what it looks like. Points to keep in mind: you need a good, if you have heavy rust, you need a grinder. Doesn't have to be an expensive grinder. I have a couple of Harbor Freight grinders. The reason I have a couple of them, when they go on sale, I pick them up for $10, and having a pair of them, I don't have to change the discs that are on them when I want to switch up. And if one burns out, they're cheap enough. I had one that lasted about 5 years before it finally went, and I used it quite often. You need a good grinder if it's really rusty. If not, I've done it before with just sandpaper when the rust was just surface rust, and primed it and painted. I never had any problems. But you saw what this deck looked like prior and what it looks like now. The next thing I have to do is knock out both shafts out of the spindles and change the bearings. Normally I would do that before I paint, but I didn't realize these were seized up until I started the grinding down, and I didn't want to stop this because I have too many projects that are almost done, half done, waiting for parts. I have to order 4 bearings, 2 for this side, 2 for this side. This one over here rolls fine, nothing wrong with this, and the other one I have to put back. There was nothing wrong with that one. So a couple of points to keep in mind: you need the grinder, you should prime it and paint it, and if you have old cans of paint laying around, before you discard them, even if you don't want to show it on top, use it for the bottom. If you don't do the whole deck, if you might have a couple spots that are rusted. And when I find decks that are really torn apart, it's usually over here where they start rusting really bad on the inside. This piece over here, if they're rough with them, they dent in and they start rusting right up. And this surface right here is usually full of rust on the bottom, almost coming through on a lot of decks that I end up picking up. This one was rusted pretty bad, and he must have hit something really hard, because this deck repair all started with this bracket having to be put back on. So for now, that's a wrap. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to post them down below. If you enjoyed this video, found it useful, give it a like. It helps tremendously. And if you would, pass it on to someone else who might find it useful. Just a mention I want to bring up, I'm an Amazon associate, and I also have an Amazon storefront. If you purchase anything by going through my links, on some of the products I do get a small commission. It helps with the continuation of this channel, and I do appreciate it. It's no additional cost to you, it's just going through those links. Browse through it anytime you have a chance, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe. Hit that Joe Z icon, and at the end of the video, be sure to ring that bell, not to miss my new videos as I upload them. Until next time, keep mowing and stay safe.